Secrets of Christmas Eve, a Hercule Poirot mystery. Part 1, The Invitation Before Christmas. The snow fell softly over the English countryside, blanketing the winding roads and bare trees in delicate white silence. Christmas was only 2 days away, and the small village of Blackthorn Hollow looked as though it had been lifted straight from a holiday card, chimneys puffing gentle smoke, lanterns glowing warmly through frost-covered windows, and church bells faintly echoing through the icy air. Inside the first-class compartment of the evening train, Hercule Poirot sat perfectly upright, his immaculate mustache waxed to precise points. He disliked the cold intensely, but he disliked disorder even more, and the world, in winter, always felt slightly untidy to him. Across from him sat Captain Arthur Hastings, his longtime friend and companion, gazing out of the window with boyish excitement. "Snow at Christmas, Poirot." "Just as it should be," Hastings said cheerfully. "And a mysterious country manor. I have a feeling this holiday will be memorable." Poirot sniffed. "Mon ami, that is exactly what worries me." Hastings grinned. "You always say that before something interesting happens." Poirot adjusted his gloves. "Yes. And I am always correct." A curious invitation. 2 days earlier, Poirot had received an unusually elegant envelope, thick cream paper, sealed with dark red wax bearing a strange crest, a stag's head crowned with holly. Inside was a single sheet. "Monsieur Hercule Poirot. You do not know me, but I am in grave fear. A crime has not yet been committed, but I believe it will be, on Christmas Eve. I beg you to come to Blackthorn Manor before then. There are secrets in this house, and not all of us will survive them. A friend." No signature. No explanation. Only a train ticket enclosed for that very evening. Hastings, of course, had insisted they go. A crime that hasn't happened yet. "That's irresistible," Hastings had said. Poirot had frowned for a long moment before quietly agreeing. "A crime predicted," he had murmured. "That is the most dangerous kind. Blackthorn Manor." The train slowed with a hiss of steam. Outside, a single lamp glowed over a small wooden platform. Blackthorn Hollow. The station was nearly deserted except for a driver holding a lantern and an old black carriage dusted with snow. "Blackthorn Manor," the driver said, nodding stiffly. As they rode through narrow forest roads, bare branches clawed toward the sky like skeletal fingers. Hastings broke the silence. "Cheerful place." "The atmosphere is heavy," Poirot replied softly. "Like a room where an argument has just ended, but the anger lingers." The manor finally appeared through the trees. A massive stone structure, centuries old, its windows glowing warmly against the dark. Spruce wreaths hung on the arched doors, crimson ribbons fluttering in the winter wind. Inside, a tall woman waited in the entrance hall, dressed in black velvet, her silver hair pinned tightly at the back of her head. "Welcome to Blackthorn Manor," she said. "I am Mrs. Eleanor Ashcroft, the housekeeper. You are expected." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "Expected by whom, madam?" She hesitated. "By the family. The house of many faces." They were led into a grand drawing room where a fire crackled brightly. 5 people sat waiting. Poirot studied them instantly. 1, Reginald Blackthorn, the master of the house, tall, thin, and pale, with cold grey eyes and a cane resting against his chair. 2, Vivian Blackthorn, his beautiful second wife, young, elegant, her smile brittle like glass. 3, Margaret Blackthorn, Reginald's sister, sharp-eyed, tight-lipped, her hands clenched in her lap. 4, Edward Blackthorn, Reginald's son, restless, arrogant, his eyes darting about the room. 5, Dr. Lionel Mercer, the family physician, calm, spectacled, watching everyone quietly. Reginald rose slowly. "So the famous Hercule Poirot has come," he said. "I trust someone sent you an invitation." Poirot inclined his head. "Yes, monsieur. But I see from your face, you were not the one." For a fraction of a second, something dark passed over Reginald's eyes. The first lie. Dinner that evening was polite on the surface, but thick with unspoken hostility underneath. Hastings tried to make cheerful conversation. Vivian laughed too loudly. Edward drank too much. Margaret spoke barely at all. Dr. Mercer observed everything. And Poirot listened. At one point, Margaret suddenly addressed him. "You are here to solve a murder, aren't you?" The fork froze halfway to Hastings' mouth. Poirot smiled mildly. "No murder has yet occurred, mademoiselle." Margaret's eyes flicked toward her brother. "Not yet." The whisper in the hall. Late that night, as snow deepened outside, Poirot stood in the guest room provided for him. The air felt strange. Still. Suddenly, a soft sound in the hallway. Footsteps. Slow. Careful. Poirot opened the door just a crack. Down the candlelit corridor, he saw a shadow glide past the walls. A woman's shadow. She disappeared behind a door at the far end, the door marked private study. Reginald Blackthorn's study. Moments later, a faint click. The sound of a lock. Poirot's eyes narrowed. A warning too late. The following morning, Christmas Eve dawned cold and silent. Snow buried the garden paths. The household gathered for breakfast, but Edward was missing. Minutes passed. Then screams shattered the stillness. They found Edward in the study. Dead in Reginald's locked room. The window was sealed from inside. The door locked. And beside the body, written in fresh red ink on the desk. "The first secret is paid for in blood." Poirot stood perfectly still as the room erupted in panic. Then he spoke, his voice calm and deadly quiet. "Mess Amos. The crime that was promised has now begun." Part 2, The Locked Manor. The study of Reginald Blackthorn had transformed from a place of quiet authority into a chamber of death. Edward Blackthorn lay sprawled beside the massive oak desk, one arm twisted unnaturally beneath him, his face pale and frozen in surprise. A thin dark line crept from a wound at his temple and disappeared into the thick carpet below. Vivian let out a broken cry and collapsed into a chair. Margaret stood stiff as stone, one trembling hand pressed to her mouth. Dr. Mercer knelt beside the body at once, calm but swift. Reginald Blackthorn stood utterly motionless, his knuckles white as he leaned on his cane. Poirot entered last. He did not rush to the corpse. He did not speak. His eyes moved slowly, from the body, to the desk, to the locked door, to the sealed window. Then finally, to each face in the room. "The window?" he asked gently. "Locked," said Dr. Mercer without looking up. "From the inside." "And the door?" Reginald answered stiffly. "Also locked. We had to break it open." Poirot nodded once. "And the time of death, doctor?" Dr. Mercer gently closed Edward's eyes before rising. "Between 2 and 3 in the morning. The wound suggests a heavy object, perhaps a bookend or paperweight." Hastings swallowed hard. "But the door was locked. The window too. That means—" Poirot raised a finger. "It means only what it means, my friend. Not what we fear it means. Panic before the snow." Within minutes, Blackthorn Manor was in chaos. Vivian sobbed uncontrollably. Margaret retreated into silence. Reginald paced like a caged animal. Servants huddled together in fear. And outside, the snow continued to fall, thick, relentless, cutting the manor off from the world. Poirot called for everyone to gather in the drawing room. "We must establish order," he said quietly. "Panic is the ally of the murderer." Reginald turned on him sharply. "You think someone in this house did this?" Poirot met his gaze without blinking. "My dear monsieur, at this moment, there is no one else in the world who could have done it. A heavy silence followed. The impossible room. Poirot returned to the study with Hastings and Dr. Mercer. The room was large, lined with tall shelves packed with books and ledgers. A massive desk stood near the center. A crystal paperweight lay broken on the floor near Edward's head. Poirot crouched carefully beside it. "The weapon," he murmured. "Used in anger. But not in struggle." Hastings frowned. "How can you tell?" "Because nothing else is disturbed. No overturned chair. No torn clothes. Edward did not fight." Poirot stood and moved to the desk. The message written in red ink glared at them. "The first secret is paid for in blood." Dr. Mercer frowned. "Ink, not blood." "We," said Poirot. "The killer wanted us to think of blood. But chose something cleaner." Poirot tested the door. Locked from the inside. He examined the window next, thick glass, latched securely. "No footprints in the snow beneath," Hastings said. "We looked." Poirot nodded slowly. "A locked room with no exit. A classic illusion." "An illusion?" Hastings echoed. Poirot smiled faintly. "There is always an exit. We simply have not yet learned how to see it." Reginald's secret. Later that morning, Poirot requested to speak with Reginald Blackthorn alone. They sat in the cold library, surrounded by towering shelves and heavy shadows. "Your son was not well loved in this house, monsieur," Poirot said gently. Reginald's jaw tightened. "He was difficult. And yet, his death has shocked you." Reginald's voice dropped. "He was still my blood." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "Tell me, monsieur, what secret was Edward paying for?" Reginald rose abruptly. "I don't know what that message means." Poirot did not move. "Then perhaps you know what Edward wanted. Why he argued so violently last night." Reginald froze. "Someone overheard you," Poirot added softly. For a long moment, Reginald said nothing. Then he sank back into his chair. "He demanded money," he muttered. "A large sum. And he threatened me." "With what?" Reginald's voice was barely audible. "To expose something from my past." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "And what was this thing?" Reginald shook his head desperately. "I will not say." Poirot sighed. "Very well. But know this, monsieur, secrets in this house are already killing." Vivian's fear. Poirot next spoke with Vivian in her private sitting room. Her eyes were red with tears, but beneath the grief was something else, fear. "You loved Edward?" Poirot asked gently. She looked up sharply. "No. He hated me." "Hated is a strong word." "He despised me for marrying his father. He thought I was a fortune hunter." Poirot nodded. "Did you argue last night?" "Yes," she whispered. "He told me I was next." "Next for what?" She hesitated. "For ruin." Poirot studied her closely. "Mademoiselle, when did you last see Edward alive?" "Shortly before midnight. I passed him in the hall." He looked frightened. "Of whom?" She shook her head. He did not say. But her eyes betrayed her. She knew. Margaret's silence. Margaret Blackthorn was the hardest to reach. She sat rigid by the fire, hands folded tightly. "You loved your nephew," Poirot said quietly. She gave a bitter laugh. "He was poison in this house. Then his death does not grieve you?" Her eyes flashed. "It terrifies me." Poirot tilted his head. "Why?" "Because Edward was not the worst of us." Poirot felt a chill. The doctor's warning. Dr. Mercer found Poirot near the staircase. "You should know something," the doctor said softly. Edward was being slowly poisoned before his death. Poirot stiffened. Poisoned? Yes. Repeated small doses. Enough to weaken him. Not enough to kill. The blow merely finished what had already begun. Poirot's eyes darkened. So, 2 attempts on his life. Dr. Mercer nodded. Or one careful plan. Footprints that vanished. Outside, Hastings examined the snow again. 1 set of footprints, he reported. Reginald's, from the study door to the garden early this morning. But nothing from last night. Poirot murmured to himself. Snow that hides as much as it reveals, how poetic. Then suddenly, Mrs. Ashcroft came running. Monsieur Poirot. The servants, one of them is missing. Which one? Poirot asked sharply. The new maid. Clara. Hastings looked alarmed. Missing how? She's gone. Her room is empty. And the back door, it was unbolted. Poirot closed his eyes slowly. A locked room murder, he murmured, and now a vanished witness. Christmas bells and shadows. As church bells began to ring faintly in the village below, the manor sat trapped in fear. 1 man was dead. Another secret was waiting. And the killer was still inside. Poirot gathered everyone once more. Mess Amos, he announced, this was not a crime of sudden rage. This was a crime of preparation. Of long hatred. Of history. His eyes moved slowly, deliberately, from face to face. And history, I promise you, is about to speak. Part 3, A Death at Midnight. The church bells of Blackthorn Hollow finished their mournful ringing and faded into the cold, distant air. Inside the manor, no one spoke. Edward Blackthorn was dead. Yet Poirot knew, deep in his precise, logical mind, that Edward's death was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning. A house under siege. Reginald Blackthorn stood at the head of the drawing room, gripping his cane so tightly his knuckles were white. No one, he declared hoarsely, is to leave this house. Vivian looked up sharply. You cannot imprison us. I can, Reginald snapped, if one of you murdered my son. Poirot raised a gentle hand. Monsieur Blackthorn is correct in one thing, he said calmly. The killer is among us. And until I uncover the truth, no one must go. Margaret spoke coldly. And if the killer strikes again? Poirot's eyes flicked briefly toward her. Then, mademoiselle, the killer will make a fatal mistake. The vanished maid. Hastings sat with Poirot in the small morning room, snowlight filtering faintly through the curtains. This Clara business worries me, Hastings said. She might be the murderer. Or the next victim, Poirot replied. They questioned Mrs. Ashcroft again. Clara came only a week ago, the housekeeper explained nervously. Quiet girl. Kept to herself. She worked near the study last night polishing the silver. Poirot's mustache twitched, so, she was near the scene before the murder. And now she is gone. Yes, monsieur. Poirot exchanged a glance with Hastings. Missing servants, Hastings murmured. Never a good sign. Edward's hidden life. Poirot returned to Edward's room for the first time. It was chaotic, clothes strewn, drawers half open, books piled unevenly. Unlike the rest of the immaculate manor, it felt restless. Poirot searched carefully. In the false bottom of a drawer, he found letters. Angry letters. Threatening letters. One, unsigned, made Hastings gasp. You think your father's sins will stay buried? You are wrong. If he does not confess on Christmas Eve, I will ensure the truth is known. Poirot closed the letter gently. So, he murmured. Edward was being used as a weapon. A weapon by whom? Asked Hastings. Poirot did not yet answer. Midnight spoken aloud. That night, the manor slept under terror. Wind howled through the trees. Snow tapped against the tall windows like slow, nervous fingers. Poirot did not sleep. At exactly 12:07 a.m., a sound sliced through the silence. A door. Closing. Poirot rose instantly and opened his room. At the far end of the corridor, a candle flickered. A figure moved. Poirot followed silently. The figure slipped into the east wing, a part of the manor kept mostly unused. Poirot approached. Then. The second body. The scream belonged to Vivian Blackthorn. They found her at the foot of the east stairwell. Her body lay twisted on the cold stone floor, her golden hair spread like a broken halo around her head. Dr. Mercer knelt again, his face grave. "She is dead," he said softly. "Neck broken." Margaret whispered shakily, "She fell." Poirot shook his head. "No, mademoiselle. She was pushed." Silence fell again. 2 murders. 1 killer. And now, no Christmas left in Christmas Eve. A scream ripped through the darkness. The pattern emerges. Poirot examined the stair rail carefully. A faint smear. Powder. Face powder, he murmured. He looked gently at Margaret. "You do not wear powder," he said. Then at Reginald. "You do not either." Finally he turned to Dr. Mercer. "But you accompanied Vivian earlier this evening, yes?" Dr. Mercer stiffened. "Yes, but..." Poirot held up a hand. "Do not defend yourself yet, doctor. It is too early." Vivian's final secret. In Vivian's room, Poirot found something far more disturbing than he expected. Hidden inside a jewelry case. A small vial. Label removed. Dr. Mercer examined it under brief light. "The same poison Edward was taking in slow doses," he said quietly. Hastings looked horrified. Vivian was poisoning Edward. Dr. Mercer hesitated. Or someone was poisoning them both. Poirot's eyes darkened. 2 poisoned lives, he murmured. One silenced with violence. The other, with a fall. A truth Reginald feared. Reginald broke at dawn. They found him alone in the chapel room, staring at a faded portrait of a much younger man. "I caused this," he whispered. "All of it." Poirot waited. 20 years ago, Reginald said, "I betrayed someone. I ruined a family. I took land that was never mine. A woman lost her husband because of me." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And does that woman's name happen to be Clara?" Reginald turned pale. "You know." "I suspected," Poirot said quietly. "The maid was not a servant. She was seeking justice." The third secret. Before Poirot could say more, a gunshot exploded through the manor. They ran. Dr. Mercer lay collapsed in the corridor, blood spreading quickly beneath him. Alive, but barely. Poirot knelt. Dr. Mercer's lips trembled. "Not Clara," he whispered. "It was Margaret." Then his eyes rolled back. Unconscious. Magnified terror flooded the house. Margaret screamed, "You're lying." Poirot stood slowly. Now his voice was cold. "We have had," he said gravely, "a poisoner. A pusher. And now, an attempted execution." He turned sharply to Margaret. "And you, mademoiselle, are no longer merely a sister. 3 crimes. 1 midnight. Outside, the snow did not stop falling. Inside, the truth was tearing the family apart. 2 dead. 1 dying. 1 missing. And 1 secret burning to be revealed." Poirot looked at the broken household and said, "Now, Mes Amos, the time has come to stop the shadows. Part 4 will reveal that every one of you is lying. Part 4, Everyone has a secret. The gunshot still echoed in the nerves of everyone inside Blackthorn Manor. Dr. Lionel Mercer lay unconscious on the corridor floor, his blood dark against the pale stone. The wound had missed his heart by inches, but the message was unmistakable. Someone in the house was no longer killing in secret. The killer was now hunting openly. A house divided by fear. Dr. Mercer was carried to the guest room and treated by a village medic summoned through the storm. He would live, barely. Margaret was locked in her room under guard. Vivian was dead. Edward was dead. The maid Clara had vanished. And now Dr. Mercer had named Margaret Blackthorn as his attacker. The family gathered once more in the drawing room. But this time, the warmth of the fire could not touch the cold in their hearts. Margaret's voice rang from behind the locked door upstairs. "I am being framed. You are all blind." Reginald sank into a chair as though the weight of the generations had finally broken him. "My sister, a murderer," he whispered. Poirot stood silently near the mantel, his eyes closed, his fingers pressed together. "Not yet a murderer," he said at last. "But certainly, she is a woman who hides something. Margaret's secret." Poirot insisted on speaking with Margaret alone, under armed watch. Inside her room, Margaret stood rigid, fury burning in her eyes. "You believe Emilio's lies?" she snapped. She had always called Dr. Mercer by his first name. "I believe facts," Poirot replied calmly. "And facts are stubborn things." She laughed bitterly. "Fine. You want the truth. I did confront Vivian last night." Poirot looked up sharply. "About what?" "She was blackmailing my brother," Margaret said coldly. "Threatening to expose his theft from the Hollow." "That land," Poirot murmured. "The one taken from a ruined family." "Yes. Vivian found the records. She wanted control of the estate." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "If you quarreled with her, why did you not kill her?" Margaret's breath shook. "Because I wanted her to suffer first." Poirot studied her carefully. This was hatred. But not guilt. Vivian's other life. Hastings and Poirot returned to Vivian's room later that evening. Behind the elegant gowns and jewelry, they discovered a second identity. Hidden letters. Foreign currency. And one photograph that made Hastings inhale sharply. Vivian, standing beside a child of about 7 years old, and a man in prison uniform. On the back. "My true family." Poirot's voice was quiet. Vivian was not merely a wife. She was also a mother. "To Edward?" Hastings asked. Poirot shook his head. "No. To Clara. Clara's true identity." The truth began to assemble itself like cold machinery. Clara was not a maid. She was the daughter of the man Reginald had destroyed 20 years ago. And Vivian, the woman Edward despised, had secretly been protecting her all along. But then why poison Edward? Hastings asked. Poirot's eyes darkened. Because Edward was not innocent either. Edward's blackmail. Poirot called Reginald in again. "Your son," Poirot said gently, "was extorting you." Reginald bowed his head. "He found proof that I destroyed another man's life to gain Blackthorn land. He threatened to sell the documents unless I paid him." "And Vivian knew?" "Yes." "And Margaret?" "Yes." Poirot nodded slowly. "So Edward was poisoned to weaken him. Not kill him. He was meant to suffer first." Reginald whispered, "Who hated him that much?" Poirot answered softly. "Almost everyone in this house." The doctor's second statement. Dr. Mercer regained consciousness just before dawn. Poirot was at his bedside. "You said Margaret shot you," Poirot said. Dr. Mercer's eyes flickered with fear. "I saw her silhouette. But not her face." No. Poirot nodded. You also tended Edward during his slow poisoning. Yes. And did you report it? No. Why? Dr. Mercer hesitated. Because I was being paid to look the other way. Poirot's voice sharpened. By whom? Dr. Mercer closed his eyes. Edward. Silence. Edward had been poisoning himself, slowly, to frame someone else later. Poirot finally understood. The perfect crime begins with the perfect victim, he murmured. The staircase reconstruction. Poirot gathered everyone again by the east stairwell. This, he said, tapping the rail, is where Vivian died. He turned to Reginald. You argued with her earlier that night. Yes. You left her here alone afterward. Yes. Poirot faced Margaret. You confronted her separately. Yes. Poirot turned to Hastings. You saw her alive near midnight. Yes. Poirot faced Dr. Mercer. And you followed her afterward. Dr. Mercer stiffened. Yes. Poirot turned slowly back to all of them. She was not pushed immediately. She waited here, for someone. The hidden passage. Poirot examined the wall near the stair with sudden intensity. Then he pressed. The wood shifted. A slim panel opened. Gasps filled the corridor. Behind it lay an old servant's passage, long sealed from view. Hastings stared. An escape route from the locked study. Poirot nodded. The locked room was never locked at all. The truth tightens. That passage connected 3 locations. Reginald's private study. The east stairwell. The servants' quarters. Which meant Edward's killer never used the door. Vivian's killer never used the stairs. And Clara's disappearance was not an escape. It was a retreat. Someone else had been guiding her. Reginald's final confession. That night, Reginald broke fully. I killed Vivian, he whispered. She threatened to expose me without mercy. Poirot studied him gravely. You pushed her? Yes. Margaret cried out in despair. Poirot raised a hand. But you did not kill Edward, Poirot said. Reginald stared up in shock. Poirot's voice became steel. And you certainly did not shoot Dr. Mercer. He turned slowly toward the shadowed end of the corridor. There is still one player who has not yet been fully unmasked. The unseen hand. A single footprint appeared that evening in fresh snow. From the hidden passage. Into the forest. Clara was moving again. But now. She was not running. She was returning. Part 5, Poirot notices the impossible. The snow outside Blackthorn Manor was no longer falling gently. It was falling urgently, as if the sky itself wished to bury the sins of the house before morning. Poirot stood alone in the hidden passage, his lamp held high, examining what others had overlooked. The impossible, he murmured softly, is only the truth we have refused to see. The footprint that should not exist. Hastings joined him, shining his own light toward the forest-facing exit. That footprint appeared after we sealed the passage, Hastings said. Which means someone reopened what was meant to remain closed, Poirot replied. He crouched and studied the print. A woman's shoe. Narrow heel. Not a servant's boot. Hastings frowned. Then it wasn't Clara? Poirot straightened slowly. No. It was someone who wanted us to think it was Clara. For the first time, Hastings felt true fear. You mean, the killer is still inside? Poirot's eyes glittered. Always. Time that refuses to agree. Poirot returned to the study where Edward had died. He began again, from the beginning. The broken paperweight. The locked door. The hidden passage. The poison. The missing maid. The timing. Poirot whispered the times aloud. Edward dies between 2 and 3 a.m. Vivian falls a little after midnight. Dr. Mercer is shot before dawn. Then he suddenly froze. Non, that is impossible. Hastings looked up. What is? Poirot's voice sharpened. These crimes do not move forward. They move backward. A crime in reverse. That afternoon, Poirot gathered Reginald, Margaret, Hastings, and the recovering Dr. Mercer. You believe, Poirot began, that Edward was the first victim. But he was not. They stared at him. Vivian died earlier. Dr. Mercer was attacked later. But the plan moves in reverse. Margaret frowned. What does that mean? It means the true killer did not begin with murder, Poirot said calmly. He began with control. The control of Dr. Mercer. Poirot turned gently to the doctor. You were not shot to be killed, doctor. You were shot to be silenced. Dr. Mercer swallowed. The bullet was meant to frighten you, Poirot continued. Because you had begun to understand the poison trail. Dr. Mercer's voice trembled. Yes, someone altered the doses in Edward's medicine. The handwriting on the vial labels changed. Changed to whose? Poirot asked softly. Dr. Mercer hesitated. Then whispered. Margaret's. Margaret cried out. Liar. Poirot raised a hand. But Margaret did not fire the gun, he said. The room went still. Poirot turned. The person who fired that gun is someone who knows weapons. Someone accustomed to control. Someone who moves quietly. All eyes shifted, slowly, to Reginald. Reginald stiffened in shock. I already confessed to Vivian. Indeed, Poirot said gently. But not to everything. The second gun in the house. Poirot crossed to Reginald's cane and lifted it. With a twist, click, a hidden blade slid out. Gasps filled the room. Ah, Poirot murmured. A man who hides weapons in walking sticks will not hesitate to hide guns elsewhere. Hastings rushed upstairs. Moments later, he returned pale-faced. A revolver, he said. Hidden behind the chapel altar. Reginald collapsed into a chair. Reginald's counter-truth. Yes, Reginald snarled. I shot the doctor. And I killed Vivian. But I did not kill my son. Poirot nodded calmly. I know. Reginald stared. You do. Because Edward's death was too theatrical for you. The message. The staging. The locked room illusion. Reginald let out a bitter laugh. You think I lack imagination? No, Poirot replied softly. You lack patience. Edward's true enemy. Poirot turned slowly toward Margaret. Edward was poisoned before he was struck. That means someone wanted him weak, but alive. Margaret's face had gone pale. Someone who wanted him to suffer. To confess. To beg. Poirot stepped closer. That person was not Reginald. It was not Vivian. And it was not Clara. Margaret whispered, then who? Poirot's voice fell like a blade. You. Margaret breaks. Margaret staggered back. I only wanted him to admit what he had done, she said hoarsely. He stole our father's legacy. He blackmailed us all. He used Clara and broke her. Tears streamed down her face. I gave him the poison in small doses. Not to kill him. Only to control him. Poirot nodded sadly. But control turned into rage. Margaret screamed, he laughed at me. And with that, the truth surged out. She had followed Edward into the hidden passage that night. She struck him with the paperweight in blind fury. Locked the door from within. escaped through the servants' route, and returned to her room as if nothing had happened. The one thing that doesn't fit. Poirot grew very still. Your confession explains everything, he said slowly. Everything, Margaret whispered. Poirot shook his head. No, mademoiselle. Almost everything. He stepped forward. There is one detail you could not possibly know. Margaret looked up. What? Poirot's eyes bored into hers. The wording of the message on the desk. The first secret is paid for in blood. That message was not visible until the door was broken open. Silence. Margaret's lips parted, but no sound came out. Poirot whispered. Which means? You did not write it. The third hand revealed. A soft clap echoed from the doorway. Slow. Mocking. They all turned. Mrs. Ashcroft, the housekeeper, stood there smiling. Well done, Monsieur Poirot, she said smoothly. You finally noticed the impossible. Part 6, The False Clue. The room seemed to shrink around them. Mrs. Ashcroft, the quiet, rigid housekeeper who had served the Blackthorn family for more than 20 years, stood framed in the doorway, her hands folded calmly before her, her grey eyes glittering with cold intelligence. Well done, Monsieur Poirot, she repeated softly. You finally noticed the impossible. No one spoke. Even Margaret, moments ago the center of all accusation, stared at the woman in disbelief. You. Reginald whispered. Eleanor, you've been with us my entire life. Mrs. Ashcroft inclined her head. Exactly. The first great deception. Poirot studied her carefully, as though he were observing a new chessboard after hours of play. You placed the message on the desk after Edward was already dead, Poirot said quietly. Which means you entered the study after the murder, through the hidden passage. Mrs. Ashcroft smiled faintly. And only 3 people in this house knew of that passage. Reginald. Margaret. And you, Hastings said. And Vivian, Ashcroft corrected gently. She discovered it years ago. Poirot nodded. Which is why you needed Vivian dead as well. Vivian's name fell into the room like broken glass. Ashcroft's version of the truth. Reginald rose shakily. Why? He demanded. Why destroy us? Mrs. Ashcroft looked at him with something close to pity. You destroyed yourselves, she said. I merely arranged the timing. She turned to Poirot. You are wrong about one thing, Monsieur Detective. Edward's death was not intended that night. The words struck like thunder. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Explain. He was meant to live until Christmas morning, she said calmly. Broken. Confessing. Ruined. Margaret gasped. Then why did he die? Mrs. Ashcroft's gaze flicked to Margaret. Because you lost control. The false clue called poison. Poirot stepped forward slowly. You introduced the poison into Edward's medicine, he said. But only in weak doses. Enough to make him fear death, but not die. Yes. And you wanted suspicion to fall on Margaret, Poirot added. Because she already hated Edward most openly. Mrs. Ashcroft smiled. Hate is always a useful tool. Poirot's voice hardened. But poison was not your murder weapon. It was your distraction. He turned to Margaret. You believed you were in control of Edward's suffering. In truth, mademoiselle, you were walking exactly where she wanted you to walk. Margaret collapsed into a chair, sobbing. Clara was never meant to survive. Hastings spoke suddenly. What about Clara? For the first time, Mrs. Ashcroft's calm cracked. Her role was to be blamed, she said. The daughter of the ruined man. The perfect avenger. Poirot's voice was ice. You used her grief. You gave her access. You made her believe she was helping justice. Yes. And when the time came, Poirot said softly, you meant for her to disappear forever. Mrs. Ashcroft said nothing. Silence became confession. Vivian's murder revisited. Poirot turned back to Reginald. You killed Vivian in anger, he said. But her death was useful to Ashcroft. Mrs. Ashcroft smiled again. She was becoming dangerous, she said. She wanted to protect Clara openly. That would have ruined the entire design. Poirot closed his eyes briefly. So Vivian died because she grew a conscience. Yes. Even Reginald could not speak anymore. The gun that changed everything. Poirot faced her fully now. You shot Dr. Mercer. Yes. To silence him. No, she corrected. To force him to speak later. Poirot's eyebrow lifted. You wanted a dramatic accusation. Exactly. A mistake spoken under fear is more believable than a truth spoken under calm. Poirot exhaled slowly. Brilliant. Cold. Utterly monstrous. The moment of realization. Poirot walked slowly across the room. You manipulated Edward. You manipulated Margaret. You manipulated Clara. You manipulated Dr. Mercer. He stopped inches from her. But you failed to manipulate one person. Her smile wavered. And who is that, Monsieur Poirot? Poirot's eyes locked onto hers. Yourself. For the first time, her confidence fractured. The one mistake she made. You staged everything around emotions, Poirot said quietly. Guilt. Rage. Fear. Revenge. But you yourself feel none of these. Poirot turned toward the fireplace. You placed the message on the desk using red ink. Dramatic. Symbolic. Emotional. Then he turned sharply back. But earlier, when Edward first threatened exposure weeks ago, you sent him letters. Mrs. Ashcroft went very still. Those letters, Poirot said softly, were not emotional at all. They were precise. Cold. Legalistic. He leaned forward. That change in tone belongs to two different minds. Her lips trembled for the first time. You copied Clara's pain, Poirot whispered. But not her voice. The false avenger. Hastings spoke in shock. Then the revenge wasn't really Clara's? Poirot shook his head. No, my friend. It was never hers. He stared at Mrs. Ashcroft. This was not the vengeance of a daughter. His voice dropped. This was the vengeance of a woman who waited 20 years. Reginald whispered in horror. You knew Clara's father. Mrs. Ashcroft's smile returned, but twisted now. I loved him. The hidden truth. The room seemed to tilt. You were not his widow, Poirot said. You were his partner. His accomplice. His equal. Reginald shook violently. You're lying. Poirot answered for her. She helped him acquire the land honestly. You destroyed him dishonestly. Mrs. Ashcroft's voice finally broke. And then you let him hang alone. Silence crashed down. 2 decades of buried betrayal filled the room like poison gas, the cliff at the edge of justice. Poirot spoke softly now. You did not seek justice. You constructed a tragedy where everyone would bleed, slowly. Mrs. Ashcroft laughed suddenly. And they did. Her eyes shifted toward the door. The only question left, Monsieur Poirot, is whether I bleed as well. Before anyone could move, she ran. Straight toward the hidden passage. Part 7, The Hidden Passage. Mrs. Ashcroft ran. Not with panic, but with the speed of someone who had planned this moment many times before. She vanished into the hidden passage just as Reginald shouted her name in fury and disbelief. After her. Hastings cried. But it was Poirot who moved first, not quickly, not impulsively, yet with absolute certainty. "She knows this passage better than any of us," Poirot said calmly. "We must not chase blindly." A gunshot echoed suddenly through the manor. Not from inside the passage. From outside. The forest and the frozen trap. They burst out through a concealed door behind the servants' quarters and into the blinding white of the forest. Snow lashed their faces. Footprints cut wildly through the fresh powder, Mrs. Ashcroft's. "She's heading for the river," Hastings shouted. Poirot followed steadily, his breath controlled despite his age. Then, without warning, a third shot rang out. And a scream followed. They found her at the edge of the frozen ravine. Mrs. Ashcroft lay fallen beside a twisted tree root, blood staining the snow near her shoulder. A revolver lay several feet away. But she was alive. Barely. Poirot knelt beside her. "You plan to escape," he said quietly. She laughed weakly. "No. I plan to finish it." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "Where is Clara?" Ashcroft's lips trembled. "She went to the chapel," she whispered. "Where the truth always waits." Poirot stood abruptly. "Then the final act has not yet occurred." The Chapel of Dead Promises. The old stone chapel sat apart from the manor, half buried under snow and shadow. Its doors stood open. Inside, candles burned. And Clara waited. She stood at the altar, shaking, a small pistol clutched in both hands. Dr. Mercer lay bound on the floor beside her, barely conscious. Reginald staggered forward. "Clara, listen to me. You ruined my father," she sobbed. "You made him swallow your crimes alone." Poirot stepped between them. "No, mademoiselle," he said gently. "He did not swallow them alone. The truth that destroys vengeance." Poirot turned to Dr. Mercer. "You knew the truth about her father, did you not?" Dr. Mercer nodded weakly. "He was not the thief," Poirot continued. "He was the fall man." Clara's hands trembled. "What does that mean?" Poirot looked directly at her. "It means your father did not betray the Blackthorn family." Reginald gasped. "It was Mrs. Ashcroft who altered the ledgers. Your father discovered it too late." "And Reginald?" Poirot turned sharply. "You were willing to let an innocent man take your punishment." Reginald collapsed to his knees. Clara stared in horror toward the chapel doors. "Then, my revenge." Poirot's voice was soft but devastating. "Was aimed in the wrong direction." The sound of footsteps. Slow footsteps echoed behind them. Mrs. Ashcroft appeared in the doorway, held upright between two villagers who had followed the gunshot sounds. Her arm was bleeding heavily. She looked at Clara. And smiled. "My poor child," she whispered. "Even now, you are useful." Poirot moved instantly. "No more," he commanded. The final manipulation. Ashcroft's eyes fixed on Reginald. "You knew he was innocent," she said. "You let him hang. And you slept in your warm bed." Reginald sobbed openly. "I was weak," he said. "I was afraid." Clara screamed in rage and grief. "You stole my father's life." She raised the gun toward Reginald. Poirot moved between them again. "And if you pull that trigger," he said firmly, "you will become exactly what Ashcroft made of everyone else. A tool." Clara's finger trembled on the trigger. Ashcroft laughed softly. "Shoot him," she whispered. "He deserves it." Poirot turned his head slowly toward Ashcroft. "You do not want justice," he said. "You want inheritance of hatred." Ashcroft's smile faltered. "The fall of the mastermind." Clara screamed suddenly and turned the gun. Not at Reginald. At Ashcroft. "No, Clara said through tears. You made me into this. Ashcroft's eyes widened. For the first time. Real fear. Clara fired. The bullet struck Ashcroft in the chest. She fell backward into the snow-covered steps of the chapel. Dead before she hit the ground. Silence thundered around them. Aftermath in the snow. Clara collapsed, horrified at what she had done. Poirot gently took the gun from her hands. You chose your own ending, he said softly. That matters. Reginald was taken into custody. Margaret, broken but alive, was cleared of murder but charged with attempted poisoning. Dr. Mercer survived, and testified. The village awoke on Christmas morning to sirens instead of bells. The last secret. As the snow settled once more over Blackthorn Manor, Hastings stood beside Poirot at the window. So many lives destroyed, Hastings said quietly. Poirot nodded. But one spared. Hastings looked at Clara, now sitting with a blanket around her shoulders. She will need a lifetime to heal. Poirot spoke softly. But she will have one. Part 8, A Confession That Changes Everything. The snow fell softly again over Blackthorn Hollow, as if the world itself wished to forget what had happened during the long night of blood and secrets. Inside the manor, the survivors waited. Reginald Blackthorn sat alone in the great drawing room, wrapped in a heavy blanket, his hands trembling not from cold, but from the weight of what he could no longer hide. Poirot stood before him. This is the moment, monsieur, Poirot said gently. Not for defense. Not for lies. But for truth. Reginald lifted his eyes slowly. I have lived my entire life in fear of this moment, he whispered. But I will not die with the lies still alive. The original sin. 22 years ago, Reginald began, Blackthorn Manor was nearly lost. The estate was drowning in debt. The land bordering the river belonged to the Hale family, Clara's family. Poirot listened without blinking. Her father, Thomas Hale, discovered rich mineral deposits beneath that land. Coal. Enough to save Blackthorn forever. Hastings inhaled sharply. He meant to sell the rights, Reginald continued. To lift his family out of poverty. He trusted me to negotiate fairly. Reginald's voice cracked. But I did not. 2 traitors, not one. I forged documents, Reginald said. I altered deeds. I bribed officials. And when Thomas discovered the fraud, I panicked. Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. And Mrs. Ashcroft? Reginald closed his eyes. She knew everything. She forged the final ledger entries. Without her, the theft could never have been completed. Hastings whispered, so she wasn't just taking revenge. No, Reginald said hollowly. She was protecting herself. The hanging of an innocent man. When Thomas confronted us, Reginald continued, we accused him of the theft. We planted false evidence in his home. The village believed us. Clara's soft sob echoed from the far side of the room. He was arrested, Reginald whispered. Publicly shamed. And when the trial came, I testified against him. Poirot closed his eyes slowly. Thomas Hale was executed, Reginald said. For my crime. The words fell into the room like ashes. Vivian's discovery. Vivian discovered the hidden ledgers last year, Reginald said. She recognized the discrepancies. She confronted me. And you silenced her question with fear, Poirot said. Yes. I threatened to destroy her. Instead, Poirot said quietly, you destroyed her life. Reginald bowed his head in shame. Edward's corruption. Edward found the ledgers afterward, Reginald continued. At first he was horrified. Then he became ambitious. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. He demanded money, Reginald said. Threatened to expose everything, unless I paid him enough to flee the country. And Mrs. Ashcroft, Poirot said softly, saw her perfect opportunity. Reginald nodded. She turned Edward into the scapegoat. Clara's role rewritten. Poirot turned to Clara, who sat silently beneath a blanket, her face pale and hollow. You were never meant to find truth, Poirot said gently. Only to be used as its weapon. Clara whispered, she told me my father had been murdered by Reginald alone. Poirot nodded sadly. She gave you a simple villain. Reality was more complicated, and more cruel. The weight of the dead. Silence consumed the room. Edward. Vivian. Thomas Hale. And now Mrs. Ashcroft. For deaths tied together by one original crime. Hastings finally spoke. And Edward? Did he deserve to die? Poirot answered quietly. No one deserves to be murdered. But many earn consequences they never live to face. Reginald's final plea. Reginald slowly rose from his chair and moved toward Clara. I will not ask for forgiveness, he said. I destroyed your father. I deserve whatever judgment awaits me, by the law or beyond it. Clara stared at him. I wanted to kill you, she said. Even now, part of me still does. Poirot spoke softly. But revenge did not heal your grief when Ashcroft fell. It would not heal it now either. Clara's hands shook. I don't know how to live without hatred, she whispered. Poirot's voice was gentle but firm. Then today, mademoiselle, you begin learning. The confession signed in ink. Later that evening, Reginald signed a full written confession, every forged deed, every bribe, every planted document. Poirot sealed it personally. This paper, Poirot said, will restore your father's name. Clara pressed the paper to her chest, trembling. For the first time, she whispered, he will be innocent again. Christmas night without joy. That Christmas night, Blackthorn Manor was lit, but not with celebration. No carols were sung. No laughter echoed. Only the faint crackle of fire and the sound of snowfall beyond the windows. Poirot stood alone in the chapel, looking at the frozen steps where Mrs. Ashcroft had died. Vengeance, he murmured, always believes it is justice, until justice finally speaks. A new tomorrow begins. Before dawn, police wagons arrived. Reginald was taken away in silence. Margaret was escorted under supervision. Dr. Mercer was moved to proper medical care. And Clara. Clara remained behind. Free. But changed forever. Part 9, The Real Killer Revealed. The dawn light filtered weakly through the frosted windows of Blackthorn Manor. The manor was silent now, save for the soft hiss of melting snow and the occasional creak of the ancient timbers. Hastings stood by the fireplace, hands clasped, glancing nervously at Poirot. Do you think it's really over? He asked. Poirot shook his head slightly. Not yet, mon ami. The surface may be calm. But there is one last truth that must be spoken. Gathering the survivors. Poirot called everyone into the main drawing room. Clara sat quietly, wrapped in a thick shawl. Margaret trembled in a chair, still pale from grief and fear. Dr. Mercer, recovering, leaned weakly on a cane. Reginald had been escorted by police, but the confession he had signed was present. Poirot's eyes swept over the room. Mess Amos, he said, his voice low but commanding, we have already seen how greed, fear, and revenge have destroyed lives. But there is one final piece of the puzzle. Margaret's lips quivered. You mean? Poirot raised a hand. Yes. There is one true killer among us. But not the one you all suspect. Not the one who acted in fury. Not the one who sought vengeance alone. The clue that everyone missed. Poirot turned to Dr. Mercer. You observed the poison, yes? The doctor nodded. Yes, Hercule. But I told the truth about who administered it. Poirot tapped his fingers together, thinking. And yet, the final messages, the timing of Edward's death, and the locked room illusion, these required meticulous planning. Someone had to anticipate every move. Clara's eyes widened. You mean, someone else? Poirot nodded slowly. Someone calm, intelligent, unseen. Someone whose presence was overlooked because of their apparent loyalty. He turned sharply. Mrs. Ashcroft is dead, yes. But she did not act alone. The mastermind, the one who orchestrated the poison, the false letters, and manipulated Margaret's rage, was hiding in plain sight. The unmasking. Poirot's gaze fixed on Margaret. Her hands trembled in her lap. Margaret Blackthorn, Poirot said softly, you were more than angry. You were clever. You exploited Edward's ambitions, the housekeeper's loyalty, and even your own brother's weakness. Margaret's face blanched. I did what I thought I had to. Poirot shook his head. Ah, mademoiselle. You did what you wanted, but the murder of Edward Blackthorn, the locked room crime, was not your first act. She stammered, he threatened us all. Poirot's fingers tapped rhythmically. Yes. But the planning, the red ink, the message, these required a mind detached from emotion. That mind was yours. You wrote the warning on the desk. You poisoned him slowly. You directed Margaret's and Dr. Mercer's actions subtly so no one would suspect you. Gasps filled the room. Margaret began to shake. You, Clara whispered. You, killed him? Poirot nodded solemnly. Yes. Margaret Blackthorn is the true architect of Edward's death. She manipulated the household into chaos. Ashcroft, Vivian, and even Reginald became pawns. And in doing so, she believed herself above suspicion. The final explanation. Poirot stepped closer. Let us reconstruct the events. Poison was administered in weak doses to weaken Edward without killing him immediately. Messages and notes were placed to mislead the family and frame others. Margaret's confrontation with Vivian, intended to threaten, escalated into Vivian's death, but only after Margaret had manipulated Ashcroft into the trap. The locked room was a deception created by the hidden passage and careful timing. Dr. Mercer's shooting was orchestrated to silence him temporarily and provoke panic. Every act was part of a single mind, calculating, patient, and ruthless. Every death, every scream, every secret message, traced back to Margaret Blackthorn. The room was silent. Even Margaret could not find words. Margaret's confession. Finally, her shoulders slumped. Tears fell. Yes, she whispered. I did it. Edward, he was going to ruin everything. He threatened our family, our fortune, our name. I had to stop him. I thought I could control everything. I thought no one would die. But I lost control. Poirot nodded gently. Mon Dieu. That is the danger of the intellect without conscience. Brilliant, yes, but deadly. Clara shook, looking at Margaret with horror. You used everyone we loved, for your plan. Margaret could not answer. Justice at last. Poirot turned to Hastings. It is done. Now the law will take its course. Margaret Blackthorn must answer for her crimes. Hastings nodded solemnly. It's over, isn't it? Poirot gazed out the frosted windows, snowflakes drifting silently. The night is over, Hastings. But the shadows will linger. Only the truth survives, and it is hard. Clara finally exhaled, tears flowing freely. I don't know if I can forgive her, or myself. Poirot placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. Mon enfant, forgiveness is not always necessary. Understanding is. Part 10, Christmas Morning at Blackthorn Manor. The first light of Christmas morning fell softly over Blackthorn Manor. Snow blanketed the gardens and trees, turning the world into a quiet, white canvas. Inside, the manor was still. The fires burned low in the great fireplaces, and the silence felt both mournful and cleansing. Poirot stood by a window, gazing out at the snow-covered grounds. Hastings approached quietly, holding 2 cups of tea. "Do you think the house will ever feel normal again?" Hastings asked. Poirot smiled faintly, his fingers steepled. "Normal, Hastings? No. But it will feel honest. That is enough. The truth, once revealed, cleanses even the darkest night. A family shattered, a family surviving." Clara sat in the small sitting room, wrapped in a blanket. Her eyes were red from crying, but there was a small glimmer of peace. Dr. Mercer, finally recovering from his injuries, tended to her quietly. "The truth will hurt at first," he said softly. "But you survived it. You are free now." Reginald had been taken into custody, his confession complete. He would face justice, but the knowledge of truth weighed on him more heavily than the law ever could. Margaret remained under guard, her fate sealed by her own choices. She would answer for Edward's death and for the manipulation that had plunged the manor into chaos. And Mrs. Ashcroft, though dead, had left her mark, the truth of 2 decades of deceit revealed, and a legacy of revenge finally undone. Reflection in the snow. Poirot walked slowly through the great hall, taking in the scene of aftermath. Broken furniture had been repaired, papers and letters collected, and the manor's residents quietly adjusting to life after tragedy. Christmas, Poirot murmured, is often a season of joy. But it can also reveal the darkness within hearts. The human mind, it is capable of great cunning, and yet, it is always discovered. Hastings looked around at the manor, now quiet and still. "Do you think we'll ever understand it all?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Perhaps, Hastings. But understanding is not always necessary. Justice and truth have been served. And that, in itself, is enough. The future begins." Clara, finally finding courage, rose from her chair. She looked toward the snow-dusted windows, a single tear sliding down her cheek. "Perhaps," she whispered, "I can begin again. Not with revenge, but with life." Poirot nodded. "Yes, mademoiselle. Life is the true gift, even after tragedy. The past can never be undone, but the future is always possible." Hastings placed a hand on Poirot's shoulder. "Shall we leave, Hercule?" Poirot looked at the frozen gardens, then back at the manor. "Yes, Hastings. Let us go. The night has ended. The secrets have been revealed. And Christmas morning can begin." Epilogue, the last snowfall. As they departed, the snow fell heavier, softening the world in white. Blackthorn Manor stood quiet, a house forever changed by greed, secrecy, and revenge, but also redeemed by truth. The memory of Edward, Vivian, and Mrs. Ashcroft would remain, but the surviving souls, Clara, Dr. Mercer, and even the guilty yet punished, would carry forward into a new day. Poirot, ever the observer of human nature, smiled faintly. "The mind is clever," he murmured to Hastings. "But the heart, my friend, always reveals the final secret." And with that, they walked into the snowy morning, leaving Blackthorn Manor, and its long night of secrets, behind. Endero the End Christmas Tree.